Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Greece for Reason to Resist on September 5th, 2025. For some time now, and long before Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in Alaska 3 weeks ago, we've been saying on this program until we're blue in the face that despite all of his pro-peace rhetoric, Donald Trump does not want to bring a sustainable peace to Ukraine. What he wants, rather, is for the war to continue, but for Europeans to fund it so that the United States can focus its increasingly limited military and economic resources on West Asia and China. On this program, we predicted that the summit in Alaska would change nothing on the ground, that no meaningful concessions would be made to the Russian Federation, that the fighting would continue, and that the Europeans would play the role of spoilers, which is to say, they would adopt a maximalist and inflexible negotiating position that would destroy any possibility of a peace deal with Russia. After that, Donald Trump would be able to say to his disgruntled MAGA base that he's trying really, really hard to bring the war to an end, but those damned Europeans and the Ukrainian president are unwilling to make simple and fair concessions to Russia. So far, in our view, this is essentially what has happened. Not only that, but since the summit in Alaska, Trump's attitude toward Russia and its allies has become considerably more belligerent. For example, less than 2 weeks after the Alaska summit concluded, the Trump administration announced that it had approved the sale of $825 million worth of 3,350 extended range attack munition, or ERAM, missiles to Ukraine. At around the same time, the Trump administration imposed 50% tariffs on India, one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil, as punishment for buying that oil. So what does all of this mean for the future trajectory of this war? Now here to discuss all of this with us is John Helmer, a frequent guest on Reason to Resist. John is the longest continuously serving foreign correspondent in Russia and the only Western journalist to direct his own bureau, independent of national or commercial ties. Born and educated in Australia, then at Harvard University, John has also been a professor of political science, sociology, and journalism, and an advisor to governments, including those of Greece and Australia. He's also published several books on military and political topics, including Long Live Novichok, The British Poison Which Fooled the World. Great pleasure to have you back on the program, John. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Dimitri. As per arguing we're blue in the face, my face isn't blue, but the audience can see my shirt is.
Hopefully your face won't join your shirt. So let's get into a very interesting op-ed and quite revealing, which you sent to me in the last day or two. In an interview you gave on Reason to Resist several months ago, John, you introduced our audience to a character by the name of A. Wes Mitchell. Mitchell, for those of you who haven't heard this name, is an American strategist, historian, and former diplomat who served as the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs from 2017 to 2019 under the first Trump administration. In 2019, he co-founded the Marathon Initiative, a grand strategy think tank, along with another character by the name of Elbridge Colby. John has also introduced us to that particular individual. And you've previously described Mitchell, and I think also Colby, John, as the brains behind Trump's foreign policy. Mitchell has just authored an op-ed, the one you shared with me, that was published in the Conservative National Interest on September 2nd. It was titled How to Understand Trump's Russia Strategy. And after I read it, John, I frankly found nothing in it which seemed to me to reflect a genuine desire for a true peace between Russia and the United States. The article seemed to be all about pressuring Russia, weakening Russia, buying time for the U.S. and Europe to rearm. And toward the end of his piece, Mitchell predicted that the Ukraine war would become a quote-unquote frozen conflict, which, as I understand it, is precisely what the Russian government wants to avoid. What it wants, rather, is for its core security concerns to be addressed in a way that brings lasting peace to the region. So with all of that as background, John, please give us your take on this article. What does this piece tell us about the reality of Trump's policies towards Russia in the context of what has happened in the past few weeks?
That's a tall order. Let's try without going blue in the shirt and blue in the face at the same time. Wes Mitchell, just to be clear, is a business partner of Elbridge Colby, who's now Deputy Secretary of Defense, soon to be Deputy Secretary of War. It's to be renamed the Department of War anytime soon, possibly today, Friday, with an executive order from President Trump. Colby and Mitchell make money together. They did that before the election, and after the election, Colby went into the Pentagon. He works under and reports to Steven Feinberg, a particularly characteristic type of speculative business investor close to Trump and a source of funding for Trump's elections. Now, these chaps have several interests together, and it's not true to say they're not interested in money. They're interested in a future with money and power. So to understand this particular op-ed, it's to defend Trump from the charge that he gave concessions to Putin simply by being there in Alaska, or by not being aggressive against Putin, as if the flyover of the B-2 accompanied by other aircraft wasn't enough aggressive for some of the hotter members of the MAGA constituency. So Mitchell is defending Trump's strategy and spells it out as a case of sequencing U.S. war making so that it doesn't face a war loss that would be politically damaging and therefore financially damaging and end their power after the midterms in 26 and the succession to Trump in 2028. So these are relatively young men who have an investment in the future, monetarily, politically, and therefore militarily, which is the area of policy they focus on. So sequencing war means defending Trump against the criticism that he might be about to lose the Ukraine war. And so they, on the one hand, they don't, the worst nightmare for them would be a Kabul exit, a unilateral capitulation of the Ukrainian army in Kiev, which would force all the U.S. Military officers, advisors, CIA men and so forth to climb on helicopters and fly away and rush to the Polish border. They don't want a Saigon 75 or a Kabul exit. Why? Because remember, these people are politicians. They think in terms of White House electioneering. None of these peacemaking initiatives that Trump celebrates, not one, and certainly not the combination over the last few months, has added to the approval rating that he currently measurably has. Disapproval of his performance in the Ukraine has increased by 8 percentage points, according to the last Gallup poll I saw that measured disapproval of handling of Ukraine, which is a majority, between February 2025 and July of 2025. So disapproval of Trump in the electorate threatens these fellows' power, money, re-election, power, and money. Therefore, you can deduce the kinds of policies that they are pursuing in general, sequencing the wars, going against enemies that they can demonstrate to be easy to hit because they can't hit back. The Iran nuclear bombing obliteration was Trump's initiative to demonstrate that. But he tried another obliteration operation during this past week. Everybody's seen the video, or you ought to. A speedboat is going along the water, and there seem to be people in it, and all of a sudden everything's obliterated, the Trump word. Subsequently, we're told there was a huge amount of drugs in this vessel. I mean, it's just a speedboat, so how much drug cargo it could carry is doubtful. But in any event, it represents the kind of win militarily, maximum use of force, escalation dominance. But this is against an enemy that's a speedboat somewhere off the shore of South America, somewhere in the Caribbean, allegedly in the opening of an attack on Venezuela, backed up with a bunch of US Navy ships in dock in Panama. So the encouraging thing about this is not encouraging for the Maduro government in Venezuela, but it tells you that when the Trump group, including Mitchell in the op-ed and his business pal Colby at the Pentagon, Ministry of War, face an enemy that can conceivably inflict serious damage on them, they go somewhere else. Now, they can't be seen to retreat. And they can claim some success, although it's often not claimed a success, that they have encouraged, persuaded, forced the European states to seriously distort their own domestic budgets in order to pay for these multi-billion dollar and multi-billion euro remilitarizations. Okay, so I'm trying to go from the general back to the particular. If you have Germany investing 50 billion or more euros in remilitarization of Germany, it has to have a serious enemy for an official narrative, and it has to have a particular set of requirements for its military industries to respond. And it has to pay for much of this from the United States. That's the profit-seeking motive of the Trump regime, and Trump claims credit for achieving that in Germany. The same will happen in Great Britain. The same will happen in Poland. Yesterday, President Trump hosted Karol Nawrocki, the new president of Poland, and assured him that in response to planted press questions, that the United States is going to either keep its troops allegedly on exercise, allegedly for temporary rotation, and maybe increase its troop commitment to Poland. Now, increase your troop commitment to Poland. Add that to the points you've made about the delivery of long-range ordnance to the Ukraine, and look at Mr. Zelensky's program for €1 billion a month or $1 billion a month of fresh military supplies to the Ukraine to remilitarize Ukraine. And you've got a group of European regimes, politically weak, but committed to making money for Trump and for themselves, and transforming their own domestic budgets to do so. How do you convince people to accept that the hospital down the street is closed down? And this happened all over France. The scandals of the collapse of the NHS in England are very well known. I can't speak for Italy or Germany, but you could speak for Greece. These governments committed to these escalation of expenditures whose money value goes to the United States to bring military equipment back to Europe, first to remilitarize them, allow US bases to expand there, and then to continue the war against Russia so that there are no lost wars anywhere. That's the general strategy. It's politically working. It's successful as a political formula for little Chancellor Merz. I call him Little Freddie Merz. Why? Because he's got the smallest vote mandate that a Führer committed to attacking Russia. Remember the last recent days, Merz called President Putin the worst war criminal in the world. I mean, that's to turn Nuremberg kind of on its head by the German Chancellor, who has very low vote support, and yet he's getting away with it. Now, how do you get away with things like that in Germany, in Great Britain, in France? You get away with it increasingly by repressing resistance. You may call the resistance, if the resistance takes the form of anti-immigration, if the resistance takes the form of pro-Palestine, you repress it with combinations of laws against public displays of anti-Semitism. There are a million ways in which repression is working in the US and working in Germany and so forth. So you've got a dynamic, which I hope is convincing to our audience, a dynamic for more war. We've had 100 years of war against Russia, 100 years back to the revolution of 1917. But if you're British, you happen to know that in the 19th century, the British were equally committed to destroying Russia, and they went to war in Crimea for that. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have another 100 years. And let me say that from my understanding of the Russian decision makers, the general staff on the one hand, the intelligence services on the other, the Kremlin political calculators, and all the other factions, there's a general belief that's not articulated that the war will continue, but it will be slow. No one believes it. Only retired US soldiers are selling themselves on podcasts believe that the war's about to happen instantly. That's clickbait. That's an exaggeration to draw an audience. It's not what's happening. It's not the general staff strategy as it moves westward operationally from the contact line. It's not this. There's no collapse imminent in the Zaporozhye direction, which is a current priority. There has been no collapse around Pokrovsk. Collapse, I mean, of the Ukrainian army. So the move westward is going to be slow. It's not going to trigger a collapse and capitulation on the Ukrainian side in Kiev. So it's best to understand that. In that slow evolution, what we can see over the last few days, the days you've been describing, President Trump's understanding with President Putin that he would delay offensive action against Russia, that there'd be delay on the imposition of punishment sanctions against India and the Russian oil trade. That delay lasted about 7 days. It's not even clear to me from the Trump record that he knew when the punishment sanctions were inflicted on India on August 27, 12 days after Anchorage. It took him another week before he issued a tweet giving the reason for hitting India. So Trump is very carefully manipulated by a group of committed Russia warfighters on the first floor, the ground floor of the White House, and across the street in what was once the U.S. Ministry of War, now called the old Executive Office Building. And these people are committed, they're career committed, they are Russia haters, to continuing the war. People like Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, has the same Jewish Russian Empire background that has created 2-3 generations of hatred for Russia that is exactly the same. They're not related, with Anthony Blinken from the Ukraine, and Victoria Nuland from also a family in Ukraine. There is no difference in their race hatred and their commitment to continuing the war. So you've got ideology, you've got political calculation, and you've got a campaign for the folks in Washington to make sure that the Europeans start generating the returns that Trump wants to publish, and they show it. Mm-hmm. Stephen Witkoff was sitting at the table with the Europeans in Paris yesterday, and when they got Trump on the line to talk, Trump wants to sound, and this was leaked in Axios and the other places, that he warned the Europeans, you've got to stop accepting Russian oil. You've got to stop accepting Russian gas. Who's he talking about? Well, he's not just talking about, I don't know that he knows that Russian oil finds its way into the European petroleum products markets through the refineries of Greece and Turkey. The Russian crude goes in and it comes, and also the refineries of India. So these are major petroleum imports that originate as Russian crude. Look, I could go on and on. I hope I'm making the case that in general strategy, in military movement, at the operational tactical level, the field level, and in the political calculations of the men around, mostly men around Trump, everything says on with the war. And the Russian side responds and says, we needed to have the assurance that President Trump knew what we need to know, what our basic terms are, and where we can adjust. And then we'll see what opportunity he presents, either to agree to terms. He shows no comprehension of terms after Anchorage, and what readiness Vitkov can generate through bribes and massive business investment promises. ExxonMobil in Sakhalin, maybe Boeing spare parts and resumption of airplane supplies and that sort. Those are the obvious things they're talking about. And there's no sign that a bribe bagman like Mr. Vitkov has managed to achieve anything like a breakthrough on the inducements. And there's no sign whatever that Trump has offered or is ready to lift certain sorts of sanctions against Russia's economy, Russia's trade, and so on.
And I might add that Witkoff has accomplished precisely nothing from the perspective of peace in West Asia either. In any event, I want to focus on the final paragraph of Mitchell's article. It's quite an eye popper. And he wrote, for too long, the U.S. foreign policy establishment has rolled out the tired old Munich analogy anytime a U.S. president talks to an adversary. But diplomacy is not surrender, and talking is not a reward for good behavior. Now, up until there, I couldn't agree more. Then he goes on and he says, the point of diplomacy and strategy is not to transform an opponent from within, but to shape his incentives in ways that make him more likely to do what you want for reasons of his own interest. That's what Trump is attempting to do with Putin, and there's a good chance he will succeed. What's interesting to me, John, is that he's writing this in the national interest, which is kind of like the magazine of record for American conservatives. So he's undoubtedly going to come to the attention of the Russian government. Anyways, do you think that this is realistic? Do you think that that this is likely to succeed?
They've long had.
What I'm saying.
The short answer is no.
Right.
It's more interesting. This is not a criticism, Dimitri. It's more interesting to ask oneself, how come these guys keep repeating it as if they believe it, when all the evidence is they've tried. The Clinton administration tried, after destroying the Soviet Union and destroying the ruble system and destroying the Soviet planning system and budget system, to create a class of Russian businesses whom they would control, who would serve their needs, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky did and went to jail for. They failed there. They keep trying to do the same. They create so-called secessionist movements or terrorist movements to drain resources away from Moscow. They tried that in the Chechen wars. They failed at that. They're now trying again in the southern Caucasus, in Armenia. They keep trying the same things. Why do they think they will succeed this time round? Well, I've been in that White House. You have a very short time, 4 years, in which to secure your future forever. And you've got to accommodate yourself to certain conventions of what people believe will ensure re-election or reappointment to even more powerful and financially lucrative posts. And within the convention that this is always success, they come up with new lines of initiative. And that's what this is. It's a new line of cosmetics pasted on an old, beaten up face.
Mm-hmm. Let me turn to the press conference you mentioned, or the meeting between the Polish president and Donald Trump, and the Q&A portion. Again, thank you for bringing this to my attention, John. But at one point, a Polish reporter told Trump that he had taken
yes.
no action, no action, he said, despite his frustration and disappointment with Putin. Trump bristled at this and stated, and at one point I think he even questioned how this guy became a journalist. But anyways, he stated, "How do you know there's no action? Would you say that putting secondary sanctions on India, the largest purchaser outside of China, they're almost
Mhm.
equal? Would you say that there was no action? That cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia. You call that no action, and I haven't done phase 2 yet or phase 3." My question to you, John, I think I know the answer to this, but do you have any idea what he's talking about when he says phase 2 or phase 3?
Um, well, it's no. The short answer is no. It's a very good question, so I'll get out of it by saying I don't know. It's the right question to ask because it's a threat. Okay, it hasn't cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia. What we do know, and this is interesting, although it's not published, is that the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, meeting with Mr. Putin in Tianjin and then later in Beijing, has negotiated a discount on Russian crude. Okay, I've heard
I'm sorry,
numbers.
are you referring to I understand it was already discounted. Are you saying they negotiated a further discount to
They have
compensate?
to. No doubt about it. Yes. How much of a discount that is would depend on the trade and on the nature of the mediation and the nature of the payment system. It would be dumb for me to say, I know exactly how much is coming off the price of oil, multiply it by the number of barrels, and maybe you'll get a 100 million, maybe you'll get 200 million, but you don't get billions, hundreds of billions of dollars like Trump told President Navrotsky in the Oval Office. Those numbers are sort of the equivalent of feathers on a bird, puffing up. But phase 2 yet, or phase 3, is an indication that he's been briefed to think we will hit India first, and then we will increase the pressure on all the other Russian oil trades. And we know that because they leaked it, that Trump said, Europe, we might hit you next if you go on buying Russian oil, either in the form of crude, that means Slovakia, that means Hungary, it means the Eastern European states, or we might begin to hit punishment for taking Russian-based petroleum product imports from Turkey, Greece, and India. Now, that's what phase 2 might be, but phase 3 might be even more. It's cumulative threat, cumulative intimidation. Does Trump actually know what's in each stage? Have they? Trump, Rubio, the national security advisor / State Department head, Witkoff, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Colby and Feinberg in the pen. Do they know what the sequence would be? Is there a piece of paper? There should be, in which it sets out a schedule. If Putin doesn't do this, we hit him with that. And if he doesn't do that, then we hit him with more. That's phase 2, phase 3. But we know that Trump doesn't read pieces of paper. He likes pictures. And he doesn't have a very good memory. He can remember dead ducks in an English pond allegedly killed by Novichok back in 2018. That was fake, but the CIA chief who promoted the pictures got promoted. We know that he keeps talking about the spires and turrets of the Ukraine that he sees lying on the ground, although turrets and spires really are not part of the church architecture of a country like Ukraine. And so on and on and on. He gets his pictures muddled. But the theme that drives all of this has to be paper, which is circulated among a small group of people who want to continue the war. So he's got Mr. Nawrocki, the new Polish president, to understand that I'm going to put more troops in there. The Polish journalist, he misunderstood. And that's funny. You ought to get a new job. He told the Polish radio journalist. I mean, you don't get more anti-Russian than Polish state radio. He picked on the wrong guy. And it's funny. It truly is funny.
It is.
But it's not so funny if you're on the receiving end. And the good part is that the countries on the receiving end are fighting back. Not only Prime Minister Modi, not only President Xi, not only the North Korean president, but even the Prime Minister of Slovakia. Just let's remember that President Putin met with Robert Fico after the SCO, and at their meeting, Fico told him, look, the Ukrainians are attacking the Druzhba pipeline that delivers oil and gas for us. And Putin gave him a regular piece of advice. He said, fine, if that's what they're going to do to you, and then why don't you cut off your supply of electricity to the Ukraine? Why don't you retaliate? That's a terrific piece of advice. Well, it wasn't said by Mr. Fico, well, why don't you take your own advice? Why don't you knock the lights out of the Ukraine? Why have you, President Putin, promised President Trump since February 12 that you won't hit that level of energy infrastructure that was associated with the electric war targeting the year before? If Putin can advise Slovakia to do that, how come he can't tell the general staff in Moscow, go do that? Well, the answer is there is a caution. There is a flexibility on the Russian side, everyone, that in handling Trump, isn't it cheaper to humor the man, flatter the man, press him to the extent to which he might go to your advantage? Isn't that cheaper than fighting? It's usually cheaper. Bribes and fraud, money is usually cheaper than guns and force. And
can I just dig down into this? When you say, because I'm wondering what it is that Russia gains from Trump by doing that, realistically, what it can gain. In your opinion, based on everything you've seen of Trump, what realistically can it gain from Trump by adopting that strategy? By, for example, saying we're not going to completely obliterate Ukraine's energy grid.
What does it gain? A very good question. I would say that there are profound differences of opinion. There were more profound differences of opinion back a few months or a few weeks ago than there are today. With time, Trump is proving to be less of an opportunity and more unpredictably an adversary or enemy than those who favored being patient, being appeasing. Now, the president, Mr. Putin, must seem to reflect the soft line. There's also a Russian business community interest, and you can see it the way the Russian stock exchange goes up and down, but it's represented to the Americans by Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russia Direct Investment Fund, the Russian Sovereign Fund, and his job as a presidential emissary with the Americans, he was educated in the United States from high school on, and he thinks, well, let me not characterize what he thinks. His job is to induce American business to do things that are in Russian interest. And we talked about Boeing, we talked about Sakhalin-1 and so forth. There are many, there's an enormous number of these possible lures. So they're only possible in the theory that the Russian side is using money to persuade American money. They can make more money in their interest if they delay this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 that Trump is talking about. So delay always makes money. I mean, that's other people's job. It's not your job or mine. But if there's a delay that keeps the price of any commodity that the US is hitting with tariffs and keeps the price from moving upwards, somebody will find a way of arbitraging the difference in time and the difference in cost and the difference in value and make profit. Now, that's what the sons of Witkop, the sons of Lutnick, the sons of Trump are expert at doing, while they advance the crypto financing methods of skimming many of these major financial transfers and investments. So delay is not nothing. It makes advantage, political advantage rather minor, money advantage possibly rather greater. But with time, to come back to your question, Dimitri, I think we could say that the level of optimism that was held towards the Trump opportunity in February, not just by President Putin, not by the Russians, but by the Indians, who didn't want to see what could be achieved on the positive side. That confidence is evaporating. Now, I've got here, somewhere here on my desk, President Putin, in his Beijing press conference yesterday, again ran the line. Shall I read it to you? He says, first of all, about Witkov. I'm absolutely convinced that Mr. Witkov conveys in his contacts with me and other members of the Russian team the position of the US president and not of anyone else. I don't believe that. It's not true. Nobody believes that. Clear. It's the other way round. But President Putin's saying it that way so we can all understand, or at least in Moscow, everybody understands. It's the other way round. Our talks in Anchorage have shown, it was clear from the context of our talks, says Putin, that he conveys to President Trump the position of the Russian side quite correctly. Well, maybe true. But I think I'm having trouble finding where Putin said yesterday that we still regard. Yes, here we are. This is yesterday in Beijing with the most beautiful backdrop of the Forbidden City, illuminated in gold and in red. And there's the president of Russia saying this. We see the commitment and sincere desire of the current administration led by President Trump to find a solution, not just to issue appeals. I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. We will see how it goes from here. If not, we will have to achieve the task set before us by military means. Trump said the same thing. We'll see how it goes, and then I'm disappointed in the guy. I've not got any more messages. I'm reading from the Navrotsky transcript yesterday, but there's some other interviews that Trump gave. I'm just very disappointed. I'm disappointed, but I have no more messages. We understand each other. We may have they may have to keep fighting. So basically, the balloon of optimism that we began with in February is slowly losing all its air. But why say otherwise? Just as you said, if the US is pumping in new long-range missiles and coining more and more profit from Polish and English and French and German procurements, which in turn go back into the Ukraine, why not just keep this going for as long as they can?
Right. We often, those of us who pay a lot of attention to these negotiations and who are convinced that the Europeans, or neither the Europeans nor the Americans, and certainly not Zelensky, have any appetite for making the kinds of concessions to Russia that would be necessary to bring a war to an end. When we try to understand why Russia is nonetheless engaging in these negotiations, we talk about what they can gain, as I just did. I just asked you this very question. What can they gain from Trump realistically? And
did I answer it?
You did. And oftentimes we'll also say, that this is that President Putin he's trying to accommodate the desires of people in the global south to see the war brought to an end. He wants to be seen by other governments to be at least willing to engage with President Trump. But we don't often talk about the domestic considerations. And I want to ask you about a poll. And I don't think that this is an outlier. I think that this poll is pretty reflective of Russian people's sentiment over the past uh, more than a year, I think, and maybe even going all the way back to 2022. But this was a poll done by the Levada Center, which I understand
Yes.
is a reputable polling station, that a polling firm that has a rather critical perspective on Vladimir Putin. That's my understanding. And it did a poll in April.
It's a credible polling. It's independent of the state, whereas CIOM is a government polling agency. It's not contracted to any state operation I can think of, and it has been sanctioned to some minor extent in Moscow. But the Levada Center does credible polls, credible from a professional sociological standard. Yes.
And these
So
polls, I'm not going to ask you about these polls, but these polls consistently show, the Levada polls, very high by Western standards, very high approval ratings for Vladimir
yes.
Putin. I mean, really epic approval ratings when you compare them to the approval ratings of the leaders of major Western countries. But the poll that I want to focus upon, April of this year, it found that 61% of Russians believe that peace negotiations should now proceed. So this would have been, 3 months into the second Trump
Yes.
administration. And 1 in 3, only 30%, said it is necessary to continue hostilities. Now, I just want to say at the outset that I don't think somebody believing that peace negotiations should proceed is equivalent to somebody believing that a deal should be done at any cost. This is the question in many
Yeah.
people's mind. The Russian people, I think, this leaves open the question. This poll: what do you think Russia should give up in order to have peace? They just want
Yes.
peace. But nonetheless, this poll suggests to me that there are domestic considerations here as well, and that when Vladimir Putin is engaging in what many of us regard as theater, because we don't see any willingness on the side of the Americans and the Europeans to make concessions, he's doing this because this is what the Russian people, by and large, want him to do. They want him to engage in negotiations. Do you think that that's a major factor influencing the the Putin government's approach to the Trump administration?
Yes, I think it, and I'm very glad you've said it. I think that the point you're making is a very valuable one. In the Dances with Bears website, you can see that from time to time, as often as they produce a poll, I try to show in English what the audience in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere should make of this. Let me give you 2 points. First of all, Russian women have a stronger commitment or belief that one should negotiate if one can, not fight. My wife we used to have breakfast discussions over the overnight news. And at some point, Tanya felt, look, I want to stop talking about the war. I can't bear it anymore. I can't bear it anymore. This is a woman who's lived with me for almost 30 years. And I know from my family-in-law that the Russian women have strongly endorsed peacemaking if it's possible. It's not because Russian men are gung-ho or foolish, but Russian women have been more. I don't know what the poll is, if you can see it, if there's a breakdown between the sexes. Second, it changes with time. It changes with time. Some of the polls have.
Sorry, John, I just want to share that data. That's a good question. It said share of supporters of peace talks is higher among women, 68%. So it's 61% overall and 68% among women. So it's clearly much higher amongst women than it is amongst
Yes,
men.
if it's overall 61, it means there's a much bigger split between men and women. There'll also be a split in age group. There'll also be a split by social class, which means the young Muscovites want negotiation because they want to go back to, I don't know what they like to do in Italy or on the beach in Mykonos or wherever. So there are these factors. But that does, as you pointed out correctly, Dimitri, and it's an important point, it doesn't influence the high level over 80% stable and in high, 4 times Macron, 4 times Merz, 4 times Starmer of support and approval for Putin. Now, approval for Putin, you put the words in my mouth. Approval depends on confidence that he's not going to do something so adventurous people we know will die.
Right.
Therefore, a lot of President Putin's appease Trump is directed, and that's your point, isn't it, at the domestic Russian constituencies. First. Second, it changes with time. Between December last year and February, you got a spurt in Russian apparent confidence in the potential friendliness in the United States. And some podcasters I respect suddenly said, look, the United States isn't the chief enemy anymore. Germany is, or the British are. No, Russians are simply reflecting the same view. We don't know what Trump's going to do, but he can't be worse than Biden and the Blinken gang. We know about them. They're Russia haters. They're racist. They're as bad as Adolf Hitler was. So they were willing to give the benefit of the doubt, and that benefit of the doubt is evaporating. It evaporates on the battlefield. It evaporates in Trump's behavior. So over time, the poll of April will, I think, have a different result if we poll in September. Children have gone back to school. What do they think? What do people think about President Putin's performance? Answer: he's done the best he could. Mm-hmm. From a Russian point of view, everybody heard Vladimir Vladimirovich say, I'm happy to meet with Trump in Istanbul, and I prefer to meet him last month, not in Alaska. That was Trump's idea. I want to go to Dubai. He said it, or the UAE, Abu Dhabi. He said it, but he conceded to the Americans. They wanted an armed base in Alaska. Okay, President Putin doesn't have a problem, but what's the display? The display to a Russian, and one's got to respect the sense of this. He's not wasting our lives. And just remember, we're not talking about the numbers. Russia has endured significant casualties. Nothing like the garbage that General Kellogg or Zelensky or the British media, the American media say. But Russian life is valued whatever the New York Times or Kellogg or any of these people say. And one thing no politician can dare, not Americans in 1968 in Vietnam after the Tet Offensive, no politician can survive the popular perception he's wasting our children's lives. Right. That's death for the politician. President Putin is stable, has stable confidence. And by the way, if you look at those polls, women and men, Russians of all ages, have equally high confidence in the Russian army. That's something.
Right. Absolutely. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for your thoughts in the relatively short time remaining to us. Sorry to put a time constraint on you, but I have only about 10 minutes. If I didn't ask you to comment on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's 2-day summit in Changchun. And my question is complex. The answer is complex, but the question is pretty simple.
You betcha. Yeah.
Many are we've all seen the images. Sorry, go ahead. You were going to say
something. No. You continue.
We've all seen the images of, Modi and Putin and Xi warmly embracing and laughing and, essentially, I think, giving in a diplomatic way a rather sizable middle finger to the Trump administration's efforts to, drive a wedge between them, and in particular to drive a wedge between India and Russia. And a lot of people in the alternative media are characterizing this summit as a pivotal moment in history. Um, one
Sorry.
one might say that this is simply continuity, that things continue to head in the direction in which they've been heading for quite some time now. Do you see this 2-day summit as having been a pivotal moment in the shift of global power, remaking of the world, of the global order, or is this simply more of the same?
It's neither. I mean, look, I'm an old guy. And so I've seen a lot of pivotal moments turn out to be molehills, not pivotals. But let's not let's look at the positives, let's look at the negatives, and let's look what lay in between. One can't fault the display of the Troika. And that's particularly important to confirm the closeness of the Russians with both India and China. Second, it's very important that India and China are under common pressures from Trump and the war fighters that you quoted, Mitchell, Colby, and the rest. It's very important that India and China find a new way of resolving their trade deficit problem, their reciprocal investment problem, and especially their border problem, where there's been incidental fighting. It's very important, and Xi and Modi produced the appearance of concrete proposals, and there are concrete proposals which were taken by the Chinese to Delhi a few days before the SCO summit, the Tianjin summit, and this is very important. It's pivotal between China and India, and it's a huge backfire on Trump. It's a serious blow to the effort, with the mentality that if the White House punished India but left China alone, that would induce the Chinese to be less connected to the Russians. The second big, huge backfire, and really a positive achievement of the SCO summit, was the bilateral agreement finally reached between China and Russia to build the Siberia 2 pipeline, the gas pipeline. This has been under negotiation. President Putin said it at the press conference for years, and it has been delayed because there have been fundamental arguments between the Chinese side and the Russian side of how to price the gas. I won't go into the differences that Russians have. They have, and it's not just oil. I've seen it in metals and other forms of trade. The Chinese side say. President Putin has indicated that the pricing disagreement has been settled on market principles without the dollar, without the link to the oil, and without the link to Brent or other Western oil markers, which is how gas has been priced until recently. He also said that the argument over the routing of, or routing, depending on which country you come from, of the pipeline through Mongolia, around Mongolia, that's been settled too, and it's going through Mongolia. So this is a major reorientation, a major source of expansion of gas, Russian exports to China, and that was settled under US pressure during the SCO summit. So these are important things. I mean, a couple of days ago, the Chinese had slipped up. They hadn't produced the Tianjin Declaration. I've now found it. Here it is. I don't know if you can see it properly. It's 20 pages, 25 pages. It's got a lot of, you might say, all hat and no cattle, to use a Texas expression. What it shows is that there have been a significant achievements on the part of the Indians in getting the consensus of the summit to condemn in name the attack, the terrorist attack on Pahalgam on April 22 that triggered the Pakistan-India war. And then there's a condemnation of further named terrorist attacks in India in March of this year and in May of this year. The Indians weren't able to get that agreement last 3 months ago at a foreign minister's level. They got it at the senior level. That's a big achievement of the Indians. And it signals, this is a very interesting point, it signals that China has had it up to here with the Pakistanis. China showed at that SCO meeting that Pakistan has reoriented militarily and politically and financially away from China to the United States. And that was reflected in General Munir's, Asif Munir's, the real leader of Pakistan, the military leader of Pakistan's visits to the United States, his lunch with Trump. But the Chinese are doing it pretty subtly. They're letting the Indians show there's been a reorientation. I wouldn't call that a pivot. It's a reorientation of Pakistan back to the United States. And China is showing it by the way in which the Prime Minister of Pakistan was ignored by almost everybody. And there is a viral video showing the Prime Minister of Pakistan racing after President Putin as he walked by, trying to get him to shake his hand. These are symbolic, visual stuff, but these are rather important strategic gains against the United States. On the other hand, the Ukraine Foreign Ministry has pointed out there's no mention of the Ukraine in the Tianjin Declaration. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians want to say, the Western media want to say, Russia didn't win its priorities. And to some extent, that has to be understood to be correct. On the other hand, Yuri Ushakov said that there was lots of bilateral discussion of the Ukraine war outside the plenum of the summit. What he didn't explain is that the Russian side, and I'm having to look down at my copy of the declaration because it simply isn't analyzed in the Russian press, and it's not analyzed in the Chinese press, and it's not analyzed in the European press. But what you can see are fingerprints around the barrel of a gun. You can see what people did, what they aimed at, what they fired at, what they chose not to shoot at. Now, Russia achieved soft endorsement of its principles, special military operation objectives. Denazification is one of the objectives of the current special military operation for Russia on the Ukraine battlefield. What we get here in this is member states welcome the annual adoption of the UN General Assembly of the resolution on combating glorification of Nazism. Well, I know we're running out of time, so I've got to speed this up a bit. That's the soft Chinese way of saying we endorse the Russian war aim, denazification in the Ukraine. It's not a brilliant pro-Russian statement. Then Russia's repeatedly said that the Ukraine attacks the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and has attempted to trigger nuclear radiation releases. It went after Kurchatov in Kursk. It failed. Attacking nuclear plants and releasing dirty radiation is a war aim of the Ukrainians. What did Russia have to say about that? No, in the Tianjin Declaration, member states note that nuclear safety and protection of nuclear facilities must be ensured at all times, including during military conflicts, to protect people and the environment from harm. Ho, ho, ho. I'm sorry, I'm not cynical about it, but it's a very, very soft way of reiterating the Russian concern that attacking its nuclear plants has been a Ukrainian, American, NATO objective. And I can go through more of this. What I can simply say is there is particular criticism of Israel for attacking Iran, but not quite this criticism of Israel for committing genocide in Gaza and against the Palestinian people. Genocide's a no-no word in China this time round. So summing up, we could go into some other stuff. There are pluses and minuses, as there must be, in a politically sophisticated, complex negotiation. It's not pivotal. It's not decisive war ending. How can it be? Anyone who thinks the US empire is going to crash soon is out of their minds. They want to believe they can watch this on TV, or they want to enjoy podcasters who tell them it's coming soon, that the war in the Ukraine is over very soon, that the war against Russia will be won by Russia very soon. Well, nothing's very soon. So major summits like this are slow contributions to the slow ending of long wars.
Right. Well said, John. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and very insightful to canvass your views about these subjects, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too, Dimitri. Let's wear blue shirts next time, both of us.
Just this is my reason to resist shirt. So it's not a sports
a
shirt.
white dove on a black shirt. Okay, yes. That's a different symbolism.
We're working to improve these T-shirts. Let me tell you. So anyways, great talking to you, and we're signing off today from Greece on September 5th, 2025.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.